Charles Ovando, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
So today you wanted to talk a little bit about specifically silence in the church and how it, quote, provides cover for bigotry and persecution. Can you sort of lead us into how you have arrived with this pretty strong statement?
Sure. I mean, my essay, of course, talks about, it's entitled Voice in the Wilderness, and there's a sense of silence that I feel Jim talked about a little bit, specifically in terms of providing cover. I think of it in terms of my profession. So I'm a high school educator. And one of the things that we learn early on is in the classroom, the hallway, in a school, you don't let things slide. When something is said, right, on a continuum for mildly insensitive to full on attacks and hostility, you can't, as the adult in the room, the space, you cannot let those things go, because it does give license, right? The message that's sent to everyone, if you're thinking of a classroom, is that those kinds of things can be said. And if you're the person who is on the receiving end, even if unintended, the message you hear is not only an attack on you, but also the sense that it's not safe for me to be here. And I think that extends to our broader community and society. And so when the church is silent on fully affirming LGBTQ plus individuals, it gives cover to what I consider our critical mass of people in the church that are earnest about their faith. And I don't mean to say that others are disingenuous, but rather I think there are people who participate in the church, not out of obligation or habit, but out of a genuine desire to grow in their faith and spiritually. And they engage in a social contract of sorts with the church. They have an understanding and expectation that the church is going to challenge them in ways that will help them grow spiritually. So when you have that expectation and your church and your leadership says things, I think these people have the tendency to listen, and they know that it's going to be uncomfortable at times. They expect it to be uncomfortable, but they take it seriously, even if they don't like it or agree with it. So when the church is silent on this particular matter, it gives a pass to us to think about that kind of stuff. But if the church were to speak out affirmatively, it would really put a lot of people in a position to listen and to think about it. And I think that extends to our broader community and society. There's a lot of legislation, Jim was referring to it. In the past year or so, over 400 bills have gone before state legislatures that are actively hostile and taking rights away from LGBTQ plus individuals. And the silence is deafening. But if we had a critical mass of people who were open to listening to churches who had something to say, I think that would change dynamics. And that's what I mean by providing cover for bigotry.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So taking further your sort of analogy to education, it seems that you're calling for a statement church-wide. So sort of quote unquote the principal or the superintendent. How do you see, like in this example, individual teachers or other students taking a stand and not letting that silence rest? So as just members of a congregation, how can we cut through that silence?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the things that we love in schools, especially secondary schools, is when students have a voice. And if you want to have effective change in the culture of your school, the student voice is absolutely critical. And if you're talking about changes in curriculum and instruction or whatever, the voice of teachers is critical as well. So things that come from on high by themselves tend to not be very successful. And I think the same is true in the church. So, there's a part of me that's skeptical about having even though I call for it, right? I'm skeptical about a great statement coming down from on high in the church having a ton of effect. I think there are people that will listen and take it seriously, but those of us in the church having voices and bringing it up, I think this book is a great example, forces the conversation and creates in that vacuum of silence, it creates some voices. I think there's probably a sense that people don't think it's really an issue in the Church of Nazarene because they aren't hearing much but they are hearing more. And I think that our voices matter in that sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when folks who maybe aren't affirming, think of this isn't really an ongoing conversation, I've often heard sort of the response that, oh, well, we can welcome queer people and we can love them, but we're not affirming their actual behavior. I think that's sometimes a response to not wanting to fully engage in that conversation. So what do you think is your sort of opinion on this welcoming but not affirming approach?
Yeah, I think it's a cop-out. I think that but we also do it with lots of other situations and issues where it's an easy pass. I love you and I welcome you. Great, but you're a second-class citizen in the church. And that's what we're seeing in the civic space as well. You have certain rights, but not all the rights. And that's an issue in the sense that our churches are not sanctuaries for the oppression that people experience outside of them, because they're treated the same way inside of them.
Yeah. So it seems that we're sort of talking around the concept of being an ally. I think ally is a word that people use a lot when in talking about this conversation. And it's easy to label yourself as an ally without actually doing much, I'm curious if you have any sort of concrete tips or experiences about being an ally, or even what it means to you to be an ally.
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is my sister. She is my sister Cynthia. She's a little bit older than me. She is married to a wonderful woman, and for about 10 years now. And as open as I thought I was at the time when things were coming out for her, I said some things, did some things, did not do some things that I think were not helpful, were hurtful. And I say that because I think when we see ourselves as allies, we have to be extra humble, I think, to realize that even in our good intentions, we can really screw things up. And so a tip is to just be open, to be prepared to make mistakes, to be prepared to do things with absolutely the best intentions in heart, and to realize that it's better to listen and to ask. And that's one of the things I did, before. In fact, I had my sister Cindy read this essay, sort of edit it before, in part with that lens. I'm like, hey, this sounds great to me. I think I know what I want to say, but what does it sound like to you? Plus, she's a heck of a writer herself. And so I wanted that lens too. But I think listening, being humble, and trying really hard not to be judgmental of others who are trying to be allies and others who are not, to be open to that and to learn and to get better at it each day. And then the second thing I would say is it's easy for someone like me to get busy in my life. And so like when an invitation to write this essay came up, I thought, great, it sounds wonderful. I want to do it. Life got busy and I almost didn't because of that. And it's a real eye opener to me to remind myself what seems like, a busy week and maybe an inconvenience. I wish I could do this later. It pales in comparison when you think about the journeys that a lot of people experience. And so the least I can do is to speak up, even when it's not super convenient.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's key to keep in mind, that from an ally perspective, yes, often you taking a risk and putting yourself out there and doing whatever, quote unquote, the least you can do is really essential, because it takes a lot more effort and a lot more pain for queer folks to do that same step. So that's really, really useful. Thank you so much, Charles.
Sure.